There is a countdown clock ticking on Deshaun Watson's neck in Cleveland right now. And here is the wild part. It was not the head coach who started it. It was not the front office. It wasn't even a reporter. Two Hall of Famers on a late-night podcast just did something Todd Monken flat-out refused to do at mandatory minicamp. They put a calendar on this quarterback competition, a specific one, with a specific number of weeks. And if you were a Browns fan, this is the moment things officially got real. Before we dive in, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop your prediction in the comments, and stick around, because what these two former players said on air lines up with what is actually happening inside Berea in a way that should genuinely worry Cleveland. This is bigger than a hot take. Let's get into it. Chad Ochocinco Johnson does not do vague. He never has. So when Ocho sits down on the June 21st episode of Nightcap and looks straight into the camera with that tone he uses when he is done playing around, you pay attention. His exact words, and I am quoting the man directly here, were that regardless of whether you are a Browns fan or not, Deshaun Watson is the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. He has earned that. But then came the part that sent the internet into a tailspin. Ocho said it is Watson's job to lose, and he gave him 6 weeks. 6. That is a Hall of Fame ex-Bengal, a guy who still talks to current players across the league, a guy who was recently seen hanging around with Cleveland's own Jeudy, putting a hard expiration date on Watson's leash. If Watson does not have that offense performing at or above expectations within 6 weeks, Ocho said, Shedeur Sanders slides in as the backup, then takes over as the starter for the remainder of the season. Boom, just like that. Not a "we'll see what happens" from a podcast host, a guaranteed. And when a guy who spent years catching passes at the highest level tells you he is guaranteeing something about a quarterback situation, that is not sports talk noise. That is a guy telling you what he is hearing. What makes this even more interesting is the timing. This was not said in a vacuum. Ocho dropped this the same week Todd Monken publicly admitted he could not name a starter. The same week, beat reporters said both quarterbacks had thrown embarrassing interceptions in practice. The same week, ESPN reported Sanders had legitimately closed the gap. Ocho was not shooting from the hip. He was reading the room. And that room is on fire. But if you thought Ocho was being dramatic, wait until you hear what happened next. Because sitting right across from him was Shannon Sharpe, and Unc was not about to just nod along. Sharpe pushed back, and this is where the conversation shifted from bold prediction into something a lot more brutal for Cleveland fans. Sharpe's take? He said he didn't think it would take 6 weeks at all. He said, and I am paraphrasing here, that maybe you get 3-4 weeks of Watson before you have to make the switch. 3 to 4 weeks. And his reasoning is what makes it stick. Sharpe pointed out something a lot of casual fans do not fully appreciate. The quarterback position, especially at this level, is a rhythm game. It's timing, it's chemistry, it's thousands of tiny reps built on top of each other until throws become muscle memory. And Watson, Sharpe reminded everyone, that Watson hasn't had that kind of rhythm in years. According to Sharpe's math, when you actually stack up Watson's game action over the last 4 to 5 years, it adds up to roughly 1 full season of football. 1. That is not a criticism of talent, that is a physical fact. And to drive it home, Sharpe compared it to other sports. If this were basketball, Sharpe said, you'd be talking about the equivalent of 16 games out of an 82-game season. If this were baseball, you would be looking at around 32, maybe 34 games out of 162. That is how thin Watson's recent game reps actually are when you break it down. Now imagine walking onto an NFL field after 2 Achilles surgeries and years of stop-start football and being expected to look like the guy who led the entire league in passing back in 2020. That is a big ask. And Sharpe was not being cruel. He was being honest. His whole point was that rhythm does not just come back because you want it to. It comes back through reps. And Watson is going to be trying to find his under an actual pass rush in real NFL games, with the entire city of Cleveland holding its breath. Sharpe's timeline is faster. But the reason behind it is what should make Browns fans sit up straight, because it has nothing to do with talent, it has everything to do with time. And Watson's clock, as we're about to see, started ticking long before Ocho ever mentioned 6 weeks. Let's just lay out what Watson's body has actually gone through since he arrived in Cleveland, because context here changes the whole conversation. His first season in a Browns uniform, he served an 11-game suspension and did not play a snap for most of the year. Year 2, he tore something in his shoulder. Year 3, he was in the middle of what looked like maybe a bounce-back arc, and then his Achilles tore. And not just once, Watson has now had 2 separate Achilles surgeries. He missed the entire 2025 season. All of it, not a single regular season snap. When Watson finally showed back up to team facilities this spring, it had been nearly 2 full years since he had taken a live rep in an actual NFL game. 2 years. Think about that. Now compare that to the last version of Watson that anyone remembers being genuinely elite. That was 2020, Houston. He led the entire NFL in passing yards with 4,823. He was a top 5 quarterback in the sport. He was 32 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, MVP conversation type of good. That is who the Browns thought they were getting when they made him the highest paid player in NFL history. $230 million fully guaranteed, 5 years, all in. But here's what the guaranteed money could not protect against. It could not protect against the 11-game absence. It could not protect against the shoulder. It could not protect against the Achilles. And it definitely cannot protect against what Sharpe is really pointing at, which is the accumulated rust of a quarterback who has essentially played the equivalent of 1 healthy season across the last 4 or 5 years. In his 3 years as a Brown before 2026, Watson has appeared in just 19 regular season games total. 19! 3,365 passing yards spread across all 3 seasons combined, 19 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Those are not the numbers of a $230 million franchise savior. Those are the numbers of a backup quarterback in a random NFL season. And that is the tension Sharpe was getting at. You can love Watson's talent, you can respect his work ethic, you can appreciate that he's been rehabbing his tail off at team facilities during the 7-week summer break, throwing with his physical therapist Billy Voltaire and his personal coach Quincy Avery. All of that is real, but rehab reps are not game reps, and the arithmetic here does not lie. Which is why when the Browns' actual head coach opened his mouth after mandatory minicamp, what he said was maybe the most quietly alarming quote of the entire offseason. Todd Monken is new to this job. This is his first year running the Browns after being brought in during an off-season overhaul that also included new offensive coordinator Travis Switzer and new defensive coordinator Mike Rutenberg. He wanted more than anything to name a starter before minicamp broke. He said so, openly, publicly, on camera. His actual quote, and I am not embellishing this for effect, was that he would love to have it named right now, but they just don't. That is a head coach admitting on the record that the competition he had hoped to close out is now spilling into training camp. And it gets murkier, because Monken also said that both quarterbacks had played well enough to earn the right to keep competing for the starting job. Now read between the lines on that one. That is not exactly a glowing endorsement of either guy. In coaching speak, that's Monken telling you that nobody grabbed this thing and ran with it. Nobody separated.
Nobody made the choice easy. He even went a step further and said he wished someone would just make the decision for him by separating themselves upward or downward. That is coach language for please one of you be clearly better or clearly worse so I can move on with my life. Neither of them did. And it is what Monken said next that Browns fans really need to hear. Reports from beat writers who were actually in Berea watching those practices described some of the interceptions as embarrassing. Not from one guy, from both of them. Watson and Sanders both had ugly moments during non-contact drills where, remember, there is no pass rush, there is no real threat, the receivers are running routes on air, and they were still throwing picks that Monken himself was not happy about. That should genuinely make you pause, because if the interceptions are showing up in shorts and t-shirts, what happens when the pads come on? What happens when a defensive lineman is actually collapsing the pocket? What happens in September when the Bengals or the Ravens are teeing off on 3rd and long? This is the quiet part nobody wants to say out loud. Neither of these quarterbacks played particularly well this spring, and that is not me talking. That is the head coach, on the record, essentially admitting it. Which brings us to the guy at the center of this whole thing, and his response might be the coldest, smartest thing anyone in Cleveland has said all offseason. Shedeur Sanders got asked about the competition during minicamp, and instead of giving reporters the soundbite they wanted, he flipped the entire narrative back on them. His exact words, and this is worth reading carefully, Sanders said, "The way you all look at things is different than how we look at things." He said the team's focus is on showing up to practice every day, being the best teammate and the best individual player they can be. He said the competition framing is something the outside world has placed on this situation, not something he is sitting around worrying about. That is a mic drop. And keep in mind, this is a second-year quarterback, a 5th-round pick, a kid who threw 10 interceptions in 7 starts as a rookie and got graded out as one of the worst starting quarterbacks from a statistical standpoint. He should be sweating. He should be sounding hungry or nervous or defensive. Instead, he sounded like a 10-year veteran. Whether that is elite media training courtesy of his father, or whether that is genuine confidence, it is a savvy play, because it does 2 things at once. It diffuses the pressure everyone is trying to put on him, and it quietly reframes the whole story. It is no longer about him fighting for a job. It's about a team preparing for a season. And you know who else noticed how much better Sanders has gotten? The people actually in the building. Browns quarterbacks coach Mike Bojakian used the phrase, "I'm blown away," when describing Sanders' offseason development. General manager Andrew Berry called his offseason phenomenal on 92.3 The Fan. Todd Monken has publicly commended Sanders for processing the game faster and getting the ball out of his hands quicker than he did as a rookie, which was one of the biggest weaknesses teams exploited last year. Sanders is also, according to reports, planning to join Watson's throwing camp down in South Florida in mid-July instead of hosting his own. That is a big deal, because it signals something a lot of second-year quarterbacks would never do. It says he is willing to sit in the same room, take reps behind the veteran, and not turn this into a public rivalry. Whether that is genuine humility or a strategic long game, it is working. Because right now, Sanders has managed to close a gap that most people thought was unclosable back in April, and he did it without saying a single controversial word. Now, here's where things get spicy, because while Sanders was quietly closing that gap, someone else in the receiver room may have unintentionally set off a firestorm. Let's talk about the Jeudy situation, because the internet ran with something this week, and I want to actually walk through what happened before we jump to conclusions. Here's the setup. Ocho went on Nightcap and said Watson would be the starter. Fans quickly noticed that Ocho had recently been seen hanging out with Jeudy. 2 + 2 got put together, and suddenly the accusation was that Jeudy had leaked inside information from the Browns' locker room. Reports claim fans on social media went as far as calling Jeudy a snake. That's a strong word, and it's a serious accusation for a wide receiver about his own quarterback situation. So let's actually look at what Jeudy said on the record, because it matters. Speaking to reporters after a Wednesday OTA practice, Jeudy did nothing close to what the internet accused him of. What he actually said was that it's important to figure out who the starting quarterback is going to be so you can get repetitions in before the first game of the season. He talked about building chemistry.
He talked about getting reps to grow as a team. That is not a leak. That is what literally every wide receiver in the league would say if you stuck a microphone in front of them. Then Jeudy added something that honestly tells you everything you need to know about where his head is at. When reporters brought up the fact that he actually has continuity in the quarterback room this year for the first time in a while, Jeudy laughed and said, "About time." He said having Deshaun and Shedeur and Dillon Gabriel all back this year, guys he has already played with, is a great feeling. He said you don't get that too often. And Browns fans, that is not a snake. That is a wide receiver who has been drowning in chaos. Think about what Jeudy's been through. He was drafted 15th overall by Denver back in 2020 and spent his early years catching passes from a merry-go-round of starting quarterbacks. Then he got traded to Cleveland in 2024, and what happened? The Browns rotated through 4 different starting quarterbacks that year alone. Then they rotated through 3 more in 2025. 2 teams, career full of new arms every couple of months. His production tells the story. In 2024, his first year in Cleveland, Jeudy exploded. 90 catches, 1,229 yards. He broke a franchise single-season record. He made his first Pro Bowl. Then 2025 hit. The quarterback carousel spun again, and his numbers cratered. 50 catches, 602 yards, 2 touchdowns. That is what instability does to a wide receiver. So when Jeudy stands in front of reporters and says he is happy to have some continuity, he's not selling out Shedeur Sanders. He's a guy who is exhausted from building chemistry with a new starter every few weeks. He is training with whoever is getting first-team reps because that is his job. And by the way, other offensive teammates are joining Watson's Florida camp too. This is not some secret Watson-only alliance. Reports suggest it's a group of guys getting work in. Is there speculation floating around that Jeudy tipped Ocho off about the QB situation? Sure, reports suggest some fans believe that. But there is no confirmed quote, no source, no receipt that shows Jeudy said anything to Ocho that pointed toward Watson over Sanders. That story is an online narrative. It is not a reported fact, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's confirmed when it's not. But even if you set the entire Jeudy conversation aside, there is one factor in this whole situation that changes everything. And it has nothing to do with football. It has to do with money. $46 million to be exact. That is what Deshaun Watson is scheduled to earn in 2026. Whether he plays every single snap of all 17 games, whether he sits on the bench in a baseball cap, whether he lands on injured reserve again, that number does not change. $46 million. It's the final year of the enormous 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract Watson signed back in 2022. And that number, all by itself, applies a level of pressure on this organization that most fans do not fully appreciate. Here's why. When the Browns wrote that check, they weren't planning on using Watson as a bridge quarterback in 2026. That was never the vision. That contract was signed with the expectation that this year would be smack in the middle of a Super Bowl window. The team would be competing for championships, Watson would be at his peak. Instead, the front office is now staring down the barrel of an expensive final year for a quarterback who has spent more time in a training room than a huddle. According to reports, some within the organization would like one last honest look at a healthy Watson before the release window opens up next June. That is a real dynamic. It's not a conspiracy, it's just accounting. On the other side of the ledger, you have Shedeur Sanders, 24 years old, second-year player, making just over $1 million in year 2 of a rookie deal, under team control through 2028. He is what teams call a budget-friendly developmental asset. And that matters because the Browns also hold 9 picks in the upcoming draft, meaning they have flexibility no matter which way this thing breaks. Now here is where the optics kick in. If the Browns decide to start Watson in Week 1, everybody in that building understands that the leash cannot be endless. Fans will not tolerate it, the media will not tolerate it. Frankly, some people inside the organization probably will not tolerate it. If the offense stumbles out of the gate, 3 and out, turnover, the pressure to make the switch will become deafening. And that is exactly the pressure point Ocho was pointing at with his 6-week timeline. It was not just a bold prediction, it was a smart read of a very real organizational reality. Sharpe just took it a step further and said 3 to 4. And honestly, when you look at the math, when you factor in the money, when you factor in the fan base, when you factor in a young developing quarterback sitting right there ready to go, both of them might actually be right. Which means every game Watson starts from Week 1 onward is essentially an audition, not just for this season, for his entire remaining career. So here is where we land. 2 Hall of Fame voices, Chad Ochocinco Johnson and Shannon Sharpe, are openly disagreeing about the timeline. Ocho says 6 weeks, Sharpe says 3 to 4. But both of them, and this is the part that matters, agree on the ending. The leash on Deshaun Watson is not endless. Todd Monken already told you the competition did not close the way he hoped. Both quarterbacks flashed, both quarterbacks stumbled, neither separated. Shedeur Sanders is calmly refusing to even engage with the competition framing, showing a level of poise that has genuinely surprised the coaching staff. Jeudy, despite all the noise about him being a snake, is really just a receiver who is exhausted from the quarterback carousel and desperately wants somebody, anybody, to stick around long enough to build real chemistry. The $46 million sitting on Watson's cap hit is not going anywhere, and the developmental pressure to see what Sanders can really do at this level is only going to grow with every 3 and out. Monken has said his decision will come down to whoever gives the Cleveland Browns the best chance to score. He doesn't care about the popular vote, he doesn't care about the media narrative. He said he won't know for sure until the lights come on, and the pads are on, and the pass rush is real. But here's the honest truth, Browns fans. This competition is closer than the loudest voices on the internet want to admit. In whichever way it breaks, everyone in that building, from the receivers to the offensive line to the play callers, just wants someone to walk out onto that field in week 1 and stay there long enough to matter. The clock is ticking. Ocho started it, Sharpe sped it up, and by the time we get to about week 6 or 7, we are all going to find out who was right. Drop a comment and tell me, are you rolling with Ocho's 6 weeks or Shannon's 3 to 4? And if you are a Browns fan who has watched this drama long enough, tag a friend who needs to see this. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns like this, and I will see you on the next one.